There are moments in life when holding on feels braver than letting go. When the past whispers that if you just try harder, love deeper, endure longer, everything might return to how it once was. But time has a quiet way of teaching us otherwise. It teaches us that strength is not always loud, and courage is not always about fighting the storm. Sometimes, true healing begins the moment you loosen your grip. This is a story about loss and patience. About failure that reshapes purpose. About a man who believed the sea owed him something, until the sea taught him how to listen. This story will show you why letting go is not weakness, but transformation. In a small coastal town where the horizon never ends, there lived a sailor named Elias. Elias woke before the sun, as he always had. The town was still asleep, its narrow streets wrapped in blue-gray silence, while the sea waited, steady, familiar, patient. He liked that hour best. Before voices. Before questions. Before memory had time to catch up. For Elias, discipline was not a habit, it was a belief. The knots on his ropes were always precise. His sails folded the same way every morning. His hands moved with the confidence of someone who trusted routine more than hope. People in the town said the sea respected him. And he believed them, because respect felt like proof that life made sense. He had been a sailor since he was young, long enough to forget who he was without the water beneath his feet. The sea gave him purpose, gave his days weight. When the waves were calm, he felt rewarded. When they were rough, he felt tested, but never defeated. Struggle, to him, was simply the price of meaning. Yet beneath that calm certainty lived something quieter. A fear he never named. A fear that if he ever stopped moving, if he ever loosened his grip, everything he loved would drift away. So he held tighter. To his boat. To his routines. To the version of himself that knew exactly who he was. At night, when the wind brushed the windows and the lighthouse blinked in the distance, Elias would sit alone and listen to the waves. He told himself he was content. That discipline was strength. That endurance was love. That letting go was for people who had nothing worth keeping. But sometimes, in the silence between one wave and the next, doubt slipped in. Not loud enough to argue with, just soft enough to linger. A question without words. A feeling that life, like the sea, was changing its rhythm. You know this feeling. The one where everything looks steady, yet something inside feels slightly out of place. Where you believe you're strong because you've never stopped, but deep down, you wonder what would happen if you did. Elias stood at the edge of the dock as the sun finally rose, painting the water gold. He inhaled the salt air and stepped forward, unaware that the sea he trusted was already preparing to teach him a different kind of strength. For a long time, life rewarded Elias for his discipline. The sea opened its paths to him like an old friend. His boat returned heavy with nets and stories, and the town greeted him with nods of respect that needed no words. Children watched from the docks as he tied his ropes with practiced ease, and other sailors measured their own work against his quiet precision. Success did not arrive loudly, it settled into his days like a familiar tide. Each journey strengthened his belief that endurance was everything. When storms rolled in, Elias did not curse them. He welcomed them as tests. He pushed through exhaustion, through aching hands and sleepless nights, telling himself that strength was proven by how much one could withstand. And every time he returned safely, pride took root a little deeper. The sea became more than work. It became a mirror. When the waters were calm, he felt worthy. When they were harsh, he felt chosen. Slowly, without realizing it, Elias began to measure his value by his victories. By how far he could sail. By how little rest he needed. By how rarely he failed. Discipline turned into armor, and armor into identity. He no longer asked whether he was fulfilled, only whether he was capable. People admired him for it. They spoke of his courage, his reliability, his unwavering focus. And he absorbed their words like fuel. Praise made the days lighter. Routine made them predictable. Purpose felt secure, almost permanent. But pride has a quiet side effect: it narrows your vision. Elias stopped noticing the small warnings, the creak in the mast that lingered too long, the fatigue that no amount of sleep erased, the way his heart tightened when the sea grew unpredictable. He told himself these were signs of commitment, not concern. That slowing down would mean weakness. That rest was a luxury for those without ambition. You may recognize this season. The one where life seems to reward your effort just enough to keep you going. Where success convinces you that control is the same as peace. Where letting go feels unnecessary, almost foolish. Standing at the helm one evening, watching the sun sink into the horizon, Elias smiled to himself. Everything he needed was right here. The sea beneath him. The past behind him. The future, he believed, firmly in his hands. He did not know that pride, when left unquestioned, often walks just a few steps ahead of loss. The storm did not arrive with drama. There was no thunder at first, no warning shout from the sky. Just a subtle shift in the wind. A restlessness in the water that Elias noticed, but chose not to respect. He had seen worse. He had endured more. And confidence, once proven, can feel like permission to ignore caution. As the waves began to rise, Elias adjusted the sails with practiced speed. His hands moved automatically, guided by years of discipline. He told himself the sea was only testing him, the way it always had. That if he stayed focused, stayed strong, this too would pass. But the storm deepened in ways experience could not predict. The wind screamed louder than memory. The mast groaned like something alive. Rain blurred the horizon until sky and water became one violent motion. For the first time in years, Elias felt something unfamiliar tighten his chest, fear, sharp and undeniable. He fought it. He pulled harder. Stayed longer. Refused to turn back. Strength, he believed, meant pushing through. Then came the moment that broke the rhythm of his life. A sudden wave struck the side of the boat with a force he could not correct. The mast cracked. Wood split. Control vanished. Elias was thrown against the deck as the sea claimed what it wanted. By the time the storm eased, his boat was ruined, adrift, broken, barely alive. He survived. But survival did not feel like victory. When he was finally pulled ashore, wrapped in borrowed blankets and shaken hands, the town spoke softly around him. Relief mixed with pity. Questions hovered, unanswered. Elias said nothing. Words felt too small for the weight pressing against his ribs. In the days that followed, the silence grew heavier than the storm. His boat lay damaged beyond repair. The sea he trusted had taken everything he built his identity upon, and offered no explanation in return. Failure settled into him like cold. Not the kind that fades with time, but the kind that reshapes how you see yourself. He replayed the moment again and again, searching for a version of himself that could have prevented it. Searching for proof that he was still strong. You know this collapse. The one where life doesn't just take something from you, it takes the story you told yourself about who you were. Elias stood on the shore, staring at the water that once felt like home. For the first time, the sea did not reflect his strength. It reflected his limits. After the storm, time began to move differently. Days passed, but Elias felt as though he were standing still, anchored to the moment everything went wrong. The town returned to its rhythm, boats came and went, laughter echoed along the docks, but he remained apart from it, a quiet figure watching from the edges. The sea was still there, vast and unchanged, yet it no longer invited him in. He told himself this was temporary. That once the shock faded, he would rebuild. That discipline had carried him through worse, and it would carry him again. But each morning he woke with the same tightness in his chest, the same refusal to accept what had been taken. Elias avoided the water, yet could not stop thinking about it. He replayed the storm like a ritual, every decision, every movement, convinced that if he just understood it fully, the pain would release him. Instead, it deepened. Guilt settled in quietly, whispering that strength should have been enough. He blamed the sea. Then he blamed himself. Then he circled back again. His hands, once so steady, felt useless. His routines collapsed without the work that gave them meaning. Pride turned inward, hardening into shame. He watched other sailors leave the harbor and felt something sharp twist inside, a mix of envy, grief, and unfinished loyalty. Letting go felt impossible. To accept the loss would mean accepting that his effort had limits. That discipline did not guarantee safety. That failure could arrive even when you did everything right. And that truth was heavier than the wreckage itself. So Elias clung to the past. He kept the broken pieces of his boat as if they were proof that his life still belonged to him. He told stories of returning to the sea someday, even when he no longer believed them. He wore endurance like a mask, hoping no one would see how hollow it had become. You may recognize this place. The space between what was and what must be. Where healing feels like surrender, and surrender feels like erasing yourself. At night, Elias sat by his window, listening to the waves he refused to face. They sounded the same as they always had, steady, patient, indifferent. And that was what frightened him most. The world had moved on. But he had not. One morning, Elias wandered to the edge of the pier without thinking. The storm's memory still clung to him, a stubborn shadow, and the sea spread before him, indifferent and endless. He barely noticed the old man sitting on a weathered bench, carving a piece of driftwood with hands that trembled like wind-blown reeds. "You watch it too closely," the old man said without looking up. "The sea, I mean. You study it as if it owes you something." Elias frowned. "It does owe me. It gave me a life, a purpose, a place in this town. I earned respect here. I earned my way." The old man chuckled softly. "And now it took it away." He paused, eyes tracing the waves. "You think letting go means giving up. But sometimes, letting go means making room for something you can't yet see." Elias shook his head. "I don't understand." "You will," the man said. "But first, stop trying to hold what wants to leave. Stop trying to force the tide to stay still. Listen instead. Notice what the sea tells you when you stop arguing." For the first time in months, Elias was silent. The wind tugged at his clothes, the gulls cried overhead, the water lapped against the pier. And somewhere in that rhythm, he felt a tiny shift, not comfort, not relief, but a crack in the armor he had built around himself. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked quietly. "Because someone had to," the old man said. "Sometimes wisdom is just a whisper. You may not see it now, but it's enough to start." Elias stayed longer than he meant to, listening to the old man's quiet breathing and the pulse of the waves. A truth he had resisted for months now hovered on the edge of his awareness. Perhaps strength was not about holding on. Perhaps courage was about surrendering, in the smallest ways, and trusting life to guide him forward. You know this moment. That first flicker of understanding. When someone, or something, offers a key, and you realize the door has been waiting for you all along. Elias did not wake the next morning transformed. There were no fireworks, no sudden clarity. Instead, there was a quiet decision, a small, almost imperceptible shift in the way he moved through the world. He returned to the pier, not to challenge the sea, but to sit beside it. The waves no longer felt like adversaries, only companions that kept their rhythm whether he noticed or not. He began with small acts, untangling old ropes, cleaning the boat remnants he had hoarded, fixing what could be fixed, and letting the rest return to the tide. Each gesture was simple, but in its simplicity, he found freedom. For the first time in months, Elias allowed himself to fail without anger. When a knot came loose, he laughed quietly. When a day passed without accomplishment, he did not chastise himself. The edges of pride softened, replaced by curiosity and humility. He realized that discipline could coexist with patience, that strength could feel gentle. He spoke to the townspeople again, not with the confidence of someone seeking validation, but with gratitude. He listened to their stories, their quiet struggles, and felt a connection he had long overlooked. Healing, he discovered, was not only internal, it was shared, in the subtle exchanges that reminded him he was not alone. Elias also returned to the water, this time with respect rather than command. He sailed slowly, letting the wind guide him, letting the waves shape the journey. The ocean, once a reflection of what he had lost, became a teacher of what he could become. He learned that surrender was not weakness, it was trust. That letting go did not erase him, it refined him. You may know this stage in your own life, the tentative steps, the small victories that feel too quiet to matter. But each one matters more than you realize. Each act of release, each moment of gentleness, is the beginning of rebirth. By the time the sun dipped into the horizon one evening, Elias felt it. A subtle weight had lifted from his chest. The storm was no longer a wound, it was a teacher. The sea was no longer a threat, it was a guide. And in that shift, a seed of peace took root. Months passed, and the seasons turned, each carrying its quiet lessons. Elias no longer measured his worth by victories or possessions. The broken boat lay where the tide could reclaim it, and he finally felt no need to chase what had been lost. The sea, once a mirror of control and pride, had become a teacher of patience and balance. Every morning, he rose with purpose, but the purpose was different now. It was not about proving strength. It was about living fully, with awareness of both the calm and the storms. He repaired smaller boats for fellow fishermen, taught children how to read the wind and respect the tides, and shared quiet stories about courage and resilience. These acts were gentle, uncelebrated, yet deeply fulfilling. Elias discovered joy in impermanence. He watched gulls wheel across the sky and felt the same freedom in his chest. He listened to the rhythm of the waves and recognized it as life's pulse, steady, patient, ever-moving. In this rhythm, he found a new kind of courage, the courage to release expectations, to embrace uncertainty, to let life unfold without force. Love, too, returned, not the possessive longing of before, but a quiet connection with the world around him. He greeted neighbors, smiled at passing boats, and offered his help freely. The respect he had once sought was replaced by humility and service, a recognition that strength is most profound when shared. One dawn, he stood on the pier as the sun stretched gold across the water, a gentle breeze brushing his face. The sea sparkled like light on glass, each wave a reminder that life moves on, with or without your control. Elias breathed deeply, feeling a peace that was earned through struggle and choice. You may recognize this dawn in your own journey, the point when letting go no longer feels like loss but like liberation. When courage and patience merge, and strength is measured not by what you hold, but by what you release. Elias smiled, knowing the horizon would always bring challenges, but also knowing he had learned to meet them with calm, clarity, and quiet strength. Elias' story is not just about a man or a storm. It is about a truth that belongs to all of us, that life will take, life will challenge, and life will ask us to release the things we cling to most. The quiet strength of letting go is a lesson the sea teaches without words, and one we often resist until we are ready to listen. Here is what his journey can teach you. 1. Strength is gentle. True courage is not always loud, it is the calm that rises after fear has passed. 2. Failure is part of growth. Loss does not define you, your response does. 3. Discipline needs balance. Effort without reflection can blind you to what truly matters. 4. Letting go is liberation. Releasing what cannot be held opens space for what can be built. 5. Healing is gradual. Tiny, consistent steps matter more than grand gestures. 6. Wisdom comes in whispers. Guidance often arrives softly, through people, nature, or silent moments. 7. Connection restores purpose. Sharing and listening create meaning beyond achievement. 8. Peace is earned, not given. It is discovered when you align your heart with the rhythm of life, not the dictates of pride. Elias now walks the pier with quiet confidence. He does not chase perfection. He does not cling to certainty. He listens to the sea, respects the wind, and welcomes each new day with awareness and gratitude. And this, dear listener, is the invitation of his story: to release what holds you back, to face storms with courage, to trust that healing and rebirth are always possible. Life will move on, with or without your consent, but by letting go, you find not emptiness, but freedom. If his journey spoke to you, carry it gently. Share it. Let it remind you that sometimes the strongest act is to simply loosen your grip and trust the horizon.